Hello and welcome to the presentation of the Q3 2022 Labour Force Survey or LFS results on today the 24th of November 2022. The Labour Force Survey is a continuous household survey carried out by the Central Statistics Office and is the official source for employment and unemployment estimates in Ireland. The official labour market classification of respondents to the Labour Force Survey is based on International Labour Organization or ILO concepts and definitions, and you can find further information about the survey in the annex at the end of this presentation. Users should note that the quarterly LFS employment and unemployment estimates are based on the latest population estimates, and this includes people who have come to Ireland from Ukraine under the EU's Temporary Protection Directive. Statistical information on these arrivals is available in the CSO's Arrivals from Ukraine in Ireland series, and a link to the series is also provided in the annex. The published infographic for Q3 is shown in this slide. The estimated number of persons in employment in Q3 was just over 2,554,000, an increase of 83,000 people, or 3.4% compared to Q3 last year. The estimated total average hours worked per week in Q3 was 80.3 million hours per week. That's up by 3.2 million hours per week, or 4.2% compared to the corresponding period last year. The chart along the bottom of the infographic shows how the increase in employment volume in the year to Q3 2022, an increase of 83,000 people, breaks down in terms of age groups. The highest increases were among the 25 to 34-year-olds, 45 to 54-year-olds and 55 to 64-year-olds, each increasing by more than 25,000. The number of 35 to 44-year-olds in employment also increased, but by a smaller amount, while the number of persons aged 15 to 24 and those aged 65 and over who are working fell in comparison to Q3 last year. The 10-year trend in labour status estimates in 2-year intervals is shown in this slide. The number of persons in employment is more than 650,000 higher now than it was 10 years ago. The standard employment rate for those aged 15 to 64 years has risen from 60.2% to 73.2% in that period. The number of persons unemployed has fallen from just over 350,000 10 years ago to about 120,000 this quarter. The standard unemployment rate for persons aged 15 to 74 has fallen from 15.8% to 4.5% in the 10 years. Persons outside the labour force is higher now by around 90,000, and the overall height of each bar reflects the estimated population aged 15 and over for that quarter, and the population aged 15 and over has increased by just over 500,000 people in the 10 years. And so the employment estimates for Q3, and using the standard ILO definitions, the estimated number of persons aged 15 to 89 years in employment in Q3 2022 stood at 2,554,300. That's 83,000 higher, or 3.4% than in Q3 2021. The standard employment rate for persons aged 15 to 64 years was 73.2%, up by 1 percentage point compared to a year ago. The seasonally adjusted estimate for the number of persons in employment is just under 2,552,000. That's a quarterly increase of 0.3% when compared to Q2 of this year. The chart in this slide shows the recent trend in the seasonally adjusted figures for males and females in employment. Seasonally adjusted employment remains in growth in Q3, but the pace of increase has slowed considerably over recent quarters. Seasonally adjusted employment for males grew by just 0.1% over the quarter to 1.36 million, and for females also by 0.1% to just under 1.19 million. The chart in this slide shows the annual change in employment volume by sex and age group in the year to Q3. As mentioned earlier, the overall increase in employment was 83,000, or 3.4% compared to a year ago. The number of people working has increased in all categories for those aged between 25 and 64, higher among males and higher in the age categories of 25 to 34, 45 to 54 and 55 to 64. There were fewer people over the age of 65 working, notably a drop among males, and fewer people aged 15 to 24 working, notably a drop among females compared to last year. The chart in this slide shows how the increase in employment volume breaks down in terms of full-time and part-time employment, with the increase in full-time employment accounting for almost all of the overall increase. The chart here shows a similar analysis for the employment status, with almost all the increase accounted for by employees. The number of self-employed persons dropped by just under 2,000 in the year to Q3. The chart in this slide shows the employment rate by age and sex in Q3. For males, the employment rate is highest among 35 to 44-year-olds at 91.8%, while for females, the rate is highest in the 25 to 34-year-olds at 78.1%. The youth employment rate for persons aged 15 to 24 stood at 49.4% for males and 46.1% for females. The annual change in employment rate, shown here, increased among most age and sex categories, and the increase was highest among males aged 55 to 64, which was higher by 5.5 percentage points than a year ago. The employment rate among younger people aged 15 to 24 decreased relative to Q3 last year, particularly among females, where the rate was lower by 3.9 percentage points. The chart in this slide compares the number of persons in employment by economic sector, or NACE classification, in Q3 compared to the same quarter last year. The highest increases were in Sector Q, human health and social work activities, which was up by 30,000 or 9.8%. Sector F, construction, which increased by just under 25,000 or 16.8%. Sectors B to E, industry, again an increase of just under 25,000 or 7.6%. The number of people classified as working in Sector A, agriculture, forestry and fishing, fell 11.6%, and sectors K to L, financial, insurance and real estate activities fell by 7.6%, while employment in the accommodation and food service sector was lower by 3.8%. The table on this slide presents absences from work during the reference week for each economic sector as a percentage share of total employment in the sector, again for Q3 2021 and again for Q3 2022. The highest rate of absence in Q3, as it was last year, was in the education sector at 31.2%, down by 2.5 percentage points on last year. The rate of absence from work during the reference week decreased across most economic sectors. As highlighted earlier, the estimated total average number of hours worked per week in Q3 stood at 80.3 million hours per week, up 3.2 million hours or 4.2% in the year. The chart on this slide compares the number of hours worked per week by NACE sector. The sector with the highest increase in terms of hours was the sector B to E, industry, which was 1.1 million hours per week more than in Q3 2021. Hours worked in the construction sector increased by 1 million hours per week. The chart in the next slide looks at the proportion of employed persons who have indicated that they work at least some of their working time at home. In Q3 2022, just over 1 in 5 people indicated that they mainly work from home, defined as at least 50% of the days worked in the previous 4 weeks, with a further 10% working from home sometimes. The proportion of people mainly working from home has fallen steadily since peaking at 37% in Q1 2021. And the sectors with the largest growth in the proportion of workers who mostly work from home are the information and communication sector, where more than 70% continue to work mostly from home, as well as in the financial, insurance and real estate sector, the professional, scientific and technical activities sector, and the public administration and defence sector. And turning now to unemployment, and again using the standard ILO criteria, the number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who were unemployed in Q3 stood at 119,100, with an associated unemployment rate for those aged 15 to 74 of 4.5%. The number unemployed was down by 30,000 when compared to Q3 2021, when the unemployment rate was 5.7%. The seasonally adjusted estimate for the number unemployed is 114,700, a marginal decrease of 100 or 0.1% on the previous quarter. And the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in Q3 was 4.4%. The chart on this slide shows the Q3 unemployment rate among different age categories for both males and females. youth unemployment was estimated at 11.2% and 12.8% for males and females respectively. But the rate for among all other categories was lower, ranging between 2.4% for males in the 45 to 54 age category and 5.1% for females aged between 25 and 34. Just over 30,000 people were classified as long-term unemployed, that is, unemployed for 12 months or longer, and this accounted for a quarter or 25% of all unemployed people. Long-term unemployment rate in quarter 3 2022 stood at 1.1%, down from 1.7% in the corresponding quarter last year. Looking now at the estimates for the labour force, and the ILO defined labour force comprised of all persons aged 15 and over who are classified as either employed or unemployed, was estimated to be just over 2.67 million in quarter 3. That's up 2% on a year ago. The estimated participation rate, the percentage of the population that is either working or actively looking for work, for quarter 3 was 64.8%. This represents a fall of 0.3 percentage points on last year's Q3 estimate. The seasonally adjusted participation rate in Q3 is 64.7%, a quarterly decrease of 0.3 percentage points when compared with Q2 of this year. The year-on-year change in labour market participation showed an increase of 51,300 or 2%. In terms of decomposing the change in the labour force, there was a positive demographic effect of 60,300, but a negative participation effect of 7,200 over the year. Aside from the COVID-19 impacted quarters between Q2 2020 and Q1 2021, this is the first decrease in participation effect since Q3 2017. As a result, while the number of people in the labour force has increased over the year, the participation rate has fallen by 0.3 percentage points to 64.8%. The chart in this slide shows the change in participation rate for different age categories for both males and females compared to a year ago. The participation rate amongst those aged 15 to 24 years and among persons aged 65 and over have both fallen in the year to Q3. Between ages 25 and 64, there has generally been an increase in participation, greater among males. Noticeably, however, there was a fall of more than 2 percentage points among females aged 35 to 44. The chart in this slide shows the recent trend in the seasonally adjusted participation rate for males and females and for all persons. The seasonally adjusted participation rate, which began to decrease slowly among females from quarter 1 of this year, is now falling, albeit slowly, across each of the categories shown. The chart in this slide compares labour market participation rates across different regions of the country by region of residence. The Dublin region has the highest participation rate in the country at 68.1% in Q3 2022, down by 0.1 percentage point from a year ago. The change is shown in this chart, with the South East region comprising Waterford, Kilkenny, Carlow and Wexford show the highest increase, up by 1.6 percentage points compared to a year ago, while the Midland region comprising counties Longford, Westmeath, Offaly and Laois increased by 0.8 percentage points. The Dublin and border regions are approximately the same as a year ago, while there has been a fall in participation in other regions. The number of persons not in the labour force, that is, not employed and not unemployed, stood at just over 1.455 million in quarter 3, an increase of 3.4% on a year earlier. The seasonally adjusted figure increased by 1.6% in the quarter. The chart in this slide shows the composition of not in the labour force by age and sex. As expected, the highest levels are in the 65 years and over category, followed by the 15 to 24-year-old category. While the chart in this slide shows the change compared to Q3 last year in the number of people classified as not in the labour force. Compared to last year, there is an additional 32,000 people over the age of 65 who are not working or not seeking work, and an additional 25,000 aged 15 to 24 years. The number of males between 25 and 64 who were not in the labour force fell by around 21,000, while the number of females increased by just over 12,000. And so, in summary, the estimated number of persons in employment in quarter 3 was just over 2,554,000, an increase of 83,000 people, or 3.4% compared to quarter 3 last year. The estimated total average hours worked per week in quarter 3 was 80.3 million hours per week. That's up by 3.2 million hours per week, or 4.2% compared to the corresponding period last year. And the highest increases in employment were among the 25 to 34-year-olds, 45 to 54-year-olds, and 55 to 64-year-olds, each increasing by more than 25,000 over the year. The number of 35 to 44-year-olds in employment also increased, but by a smaller amount, while the number of persons aged 15 to 24 and those aged 65 and over fell in comparison with Q3 last year. And that concludes this results presentation for the Labour Force Survey for quarter 3 2022. The LFS results for quarter 4 2022 will be published in February 2023. Thank you for watching.